Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can I welcome you all to today's meeting of the Public-Petitions-Committee. And as always, can I ask everyone to switch off their mobile phones or electronic devices because it interferes with our sound system. And can I just register apologies from Jackson Carlow. Agenda item 1, decision on taking business in private. The first item of business today seeks the committee's agreement to take agenda item 4 in private. Is the committee agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 2, consideration of new petitions. The next item for business is consideration of 3 new petitions. As previously agreed, the committee will take evidence from each petitioner. The first new petition is PE 1495 by Rob Wilson on behalf of Accountability Scotland on the use of gagging clauses in agreements with NHS staff in Scotland. Members have a note by the clerk, the spice briefing and the petition. Could I welcome petitioner Rob Wilson? You're very welcome, Mr Wilson. Thank you very much for coming along today. And I invite Mr Wilson to make a short presentation of a maximum of 5 minutes. That will be followed by some questions from myself, and then ask my colleagues to add some further questions. Mr Wilson.
Good morning, everybody. If you want to keep something confidential, what do? Easy. You don't tell anybody. Do you need a legal constraint imposed on you by your employer to do this? No. Yet thousands of people in Scotland and hundreds in our NHS have been gagged in this way against their will. How can this be allowed to happen in a free society? Why has the automatic use and insertion of gagging orders by the Central Legal Office become the norm in compromise agreements? Is this a help or a hindrance to openness? I'm calling for an outright ban on gagging orders, confidentiality clauses in compromise agreements in the NHS in Scotland. If NHS boards have got nothing to hide and their reputations are beyond reproach, then why do they need to hide behind gagging clauses? The workers have got nothing to hide, but they are legally constrained and gagged in a free society from speaking the truth. What kind of topsy-turvy world is this we're living in? These gagging orders do not technically prevent people from raising genuine safety concerns about events in the NHS that are of the greatest public interest, but they sure as hell scare people from speaking publicly about these vital matters. It is a fundamental breach of an individual's human rights to do this, not only for them, but by extension their families as well. Yet this is common practice in Scotland. The belated insertion of Clause 1.3 in the NHS Compromise Agreement Annex A wording that happened only a few months ago supposedly gives workers the option to make a protected disclosure. Can any of this committee name a single person in the NHS that has successfully made a protected disclosure? Could you name one? To get a protected disclosure is like saying to a starving man who needs bread that he can have all the bread he wants, only he'll have to go over to the next valley to get the bread. But in order to do so, he'll have to climb over the top of Mount Everest to get to the next valley. That's how difficult it is for a worker to make a protected disclosure. My case epitomised what should be a case that where a protected disclosure should automatically have been allowed, and yet my union, Unison, would not support me in making a protected disclosure in that case. If that case can't be given a protected disclosure, what case can? I have no problem with people making compromise agreements in order to terminate their employment to both parties' satisfaction, but there should be no automatic insertion by the Central Legal Office, as there currently is, of a confidentiality clause. How can the Scottish Parliament continue to condone such a fundamental abuse of human rights and freedom of speech? In a recent Health Service Journal article, it stated that over a 3-year period, 2009 to 12, in the NHS in England, 98% of compromise agreements had confidentiality clauses inserted into them, whether the employees wanted one or not. During the past 5 years, there have been 697 compromise agreements in Scottish health boards. The average cost of these in England was £29,000 each. If we extrapolate those figures, this means that there has been an invisible cost to the taxpayer in Scotland of more than £20 million to finance pay for compromise agreements. The details hidden by confidentiality clauses. This is a shocking abuse of taxpayers' money. In my case, there was no guidance or assistance available to me to make a protected disclosure. My union, as I say, refused to support me in doing so, despite being aware for a long time that this was a huge national scandal that I had uncovered. The provision of such guidance assistance should surely be a mandatory duty of NHS employers. We have seen, mainly due to my own case, the implementation of a national whistleblowers alert line in Scotland. I flagged up some serious reservations about the alert line that have been ignored. I wanted them to adopt the ISO 9001 quality management system. That would have solved everything in the NHS. But no, they went for the cheapest option. And reports I am getting as to the effectiveness of the alert line are far from encouraging. This alert line is run by the organisation Public Concern at Work, and there's a big review of their organisation coming out that they've carried out this week into whistleblowing. But this is kind of how it works. Imagine a telephone conversation. Mrs. Hen here. That bad Mr. Fox has been killing all my chicks. Public Concern at Work. Certainly, Mrs. Hen. I suggest you take the matter up with Mr. Fox. Fantastic. That's how Public Concern at Work does their job. You phone them up to complain about something or some major bad thing that's going on, and they refer you back to your employer, the last place you would want to go. Basic principles should be that people who have challenged patient care issues should not be subject to threats of intimidation, attempts to turn their concerns into an employment issue. Time and again we get letters from government ministers saying that this is a matter between you and your employer. This is an employment issue. Rubbish. And forced to sign confidentiality agreements. We have no idea, following the National Audit Office exercise, just how many of these agreements exist, and we've asked for a retrospective lifting. This has not been granted. Patients First, the NHS whistleblowers group led by Dr Kim Holt, who will be speaking in this building tomorrow evening, are now currently seeking an inquiry or truth commission into this whole business. We are not going to stand for this sort of atrocious corporate bullying any longer. Those who leave their employment in such circumstances become sort of ghosts, pariahs, to be shunned by their former colleagues who are wary of being seen or socialising with a whistleblower. Colleagues are left in the dark as to what happened to such people as their stories are buried by the employers. Whistleblowers should be celebrated and allowed to tell their complete stories in filmed interviews that are then posted on NHS board websites. Then, and only then, will we perhaps begin to see some real transparency, openness and honesty in our NHS. Whilst confidentiality clauses remain a normal part of such severance agreements, employees will remain vulnerable. Unions have been complicit in these agreements being made. Pretty much all of the unions are involved in what seems tantamount to a cover-up re the use of confidentiality clauses. Yep.
Near the end of your 5-minute period.
Sure, okay.
Thank you. It's just to allow us time for questions, because obviously we have other petitions later on. Thank you for your presentation. My first question is, in your view, do gagging clauses breach the European Convention of Human Rights?
I have a letter, an email here from Carol Ewart, who is the chair of the Scottish Commission on Human Rights, and in it she states that there are several issues that in her mind seem to contravene the human rights.
If you haven't already supplied that, is it possible we could have a copy of that for future
yes,
submissions?
Yes, you can have a copy of any of this. If you
Thank
want
you.
To take any of this stuff, we can photocopy it and I'll leave it with you.
Thank you. In preparing for today's discussion, I noticed there was a quote from the Cabinet Secretary for Health, and I sort of paraphrase, who basically said that if there are confidentiality clauses, gagging clauses, it's between NHS board and employees and not directly with government. What's your own view on that? Do you have evidence from health boards, apart from obviously your own, where you've had obviously a difficult experience. Do you have direct experience of other health boards in Scotland that have gagging clauses between them and their employees?
Well, there has been, as I say, 697 compromise agreements in Scotland in the last, in 2009 to 12, and I believe virtually every one of these compromise agreements had a gagging clause in it. So these are used by all health boards in Scotland.
And are these used in specific circumstances? Are you talking about your ordinary entry-level member of staff for any health board in Scotland would be required to sign one? Or do they come about where a senior employee is leaving and a compromise agreement has to be signed?
Well, this would apply to any worker who's caught up in a circumstance where a compromise agreement needs to be reached. It could be a nurse or assistant or a porter who has blown the whistle on some, nasty business going on, and their position has become untenable there, and so the union thrashes out with the employer a compromise agreement for them to leave their employment. They're given a payment, but that payment is taxpayers' money, and they have to sign this. And the compromise agreement virtually always has this gagging clause in it, and therefore they are prevented from speaking out. I mean, I know here is Annex A that back in May, this section 1.3 was shoehorned into this very late in the day. It said, for the avoidance of doubt, the employee shall not be prevented from making a protected disclosure as defined in sections 43AH of the Employment Rights Act. But, as I said, I virtually don't know anybody. There's been, out of those 697 compromise agreements in Scotland in the last 3 years, there have been four protected disclosures. What the hell's going on here? Why can these people not speak freely about this? And when you read the other part of Annex A, the terms of this agreement are confidential to all parties, and all parties agree that all matters arising out of this agreement and all matters relating to the termination of the employer's employment, blah, 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 will remain confidential, even to the employee's immediate family may be brought into this. But if they breach that, then if they reveal stuff that's been divulged to them by a husband or wife, and then they tell that, then the person can be taken to account under the law because of this. By extension, by proxy, they become gagged as well. That's a total breach of their human rights.
Thank you for that answer. Now we've over to questions from the committee. Chip Brodie.
Good morning, Mr Wilson. Can I start firstly by having living in Ayr and being subject to NHS Ayrshire and treatment, congratulate you on the work you did there. And the consequent actions are obviously by government and the health boards are, I think, attributable to the work you did. However, let me go back first of all to the compromise agreement, the 697. I mean, we are agreed that frequently it's the individual who requests the inclusion of a confidentiality clause, which are developed under guidance from the Central Legal Office. How many of the 697, to your knowledge, are generated by the employee as opposed to the employer?
Well, I believe, I have a letter there from the Central Legal Office about gags, which says that really they don't personally insert the gagging clauses. The gagging clause exists in the standard compromise agreement. The standard compromise agreement contains a confidentiality clause. So they have no say in this.
Sorry, isn't it the case the Central Legal Office for NHS in Scotland carried out a review of the confidentiality clauses and developed a revised form of wording which explicitly made clear that an individual's rights, whether they raise it or not, to raise protected disclosures is indeed protecting them, and whether they insert the clause of their own volition or not?
Well, I don't find that to be the case, because there's only been 4 protected disclosures out of 697 agreements in the last 3 years. So what's that telling you? That's telling you that people, like some of my friends who are with me today, who have been gagged, are terrified to speak out because of the consequences. They fear that they will be taken to court and maybe have their pension or any payment they were given removed from them. And that is a fear. It is a culture of fear that exists in our NHS.
Can I just on that? Because I think that's quite important. Because if I look through all the things that have happened in terms of the PIDA, the Employment Rights Act, the action that's been taken by the government, and the instructions and being given to health boards, and money that's been made available in terms of trying to change the culture of bullying. We're actually talking about culture. We're not talking about, we can legalise as much as we like, but are we not talking about management culture and what needs to be done there? I mean, I agree with the fact that nobody, and I will protect everyone's right to be open and say what they think and think what they say in circumstances like this. Whistleblowing, a culture of secrecy and bullying is totally unacceptable. I accept that, and I would support that. However, all of the actions that are being taken, I suggest, still bring you to the table, suggesting that things are not happening. Isn't it the culture of management that we're trying to change that is really at fault?
Well, of course, I mean, that is a huge part of this. It is the whole culture of secrecy. It's all about protect the organisation at all costs. To hell with the workers. To hell with them. They can go to the wall, pay them off, gag them with gagging clauses, but at the end of the day, protect the organisation. That's what it's all about. That needs to stop. That needs to stop.
The regime that has been changed, I mean, OK, we're looking at matters that came out of the Westminster government, but also actions that have been taken by the government in terms of attempting to, if not delete, get rid of all the problems that are created. I mean, all of the legalities are there and assistance is there. The question I have for you is, how would you change what is basically now a cultural problem?
Well, for a start, get rid of this. Get rid of this confidentiality clause. Get rid of that. This is total nonsense. This is like there's a huge dam here of truth and horrible things. Can I make my point? Can I please make my point? There's a huge dam of nasty, horrible things that have been happening in the NHS. And this is the thing that is log jamming that dam and preventing that information from becoming public knowledge. This here, that needs to go. And then people can speak freely without any fear of being taken to court for speaking the truth about bad things.
Just for the record, Mr Wilson, if you're referring to document, could you describe it so that for the official record I understand which document you're referring to? I'm
referring to Annex A, the style revised wording from the NHS Compromise Agreement, May 2013.
But do you accept, Mr Wilson, that the Cabinet Secretary has already stressed to the health boards that he expects them to ensure that confidentiality clauses and non-derogatory statement clauses are not used to suppress the reporting of concerns about practice in the NHS in Scotland? Now, that has been made abundantly clear, not just once, but several times, and support has been made. You say get rid of the confidentiality clause. The question I have for you is, what happens if an employee wants a confidentiality clause in that compromise agreement? How do we cover that situation?
Well, it would be up to an individual to decide upon that. But surely, as I've said at the start, if the person wants something to remain confidential, they keep it confidential. They don't share it with anybody. That's what any of us would do. Do we need to...
You can't have openness on one side and not on the other. I agree, and remember, I agree with what the intent is. You have to have, in protection of employees who want confidentiality clauses, then they should have the right to have that written into a compromise agreement, should they not?
Well, I mean, what you're saying there is like saying that we should... Alec Neil is telling the foxes to take better charge of the chicken coop. That's basically what you're saying there. These boards, These boards have been left to their own devices for years and years, and they have done nothing about it.
Right.
As despite being told again. This existed before that. This existed, the ability to make a protected disclosure has been there since 1996. So why did they have to put in another clause this year to remind boards to do that? Because they haven't been doing it for years.
But do you accept, and again you've played a significant part in this, do you accept that these things, the culture of management, it takes time to change that culture? And I believe it is changing. Do you think it's changing, or do you think it's stuck? I'd hardly use the fox and the chicken analogy, because what we want to do is make sure that everybody's either foxes or chickens, and not one or t'other, so that they understand that openness and transparency is key in any public organisation, or indeed in any organisation. So, I mean, do you detect any change, or are you saying we're still stuck in the 1996s?
Well, I could ask a member here to read a very short statement of their experience, if you would like to hear it.
No, we're very happy, obviously, for any of the members of the gallery that are here today that are supporting you to submit any evidence, and we'd be very happy to have a look at that. But it's only yourself that's before us today, Mr Wilson.
Sure.
I mean, fundamentally what I'm asking is, are you saying that NHS Scotland's Partnership Information Network's guidance is not working? Our management, and selective few, not including all management, are choosing to ignore the guidance, the instruction and the law of the land?
Well, it would seem to me that there is still a great lack of... They always talk about openness, transparency. They've been on about this for years, but it's still very, very lacking. You know, people are still scared to speak out. Nurses phone me. I get phone calls regularly from people who just don't know where to turn because they've been bullied in the NHS. And they don't know where to turn. They can't go to their bosses. They feel they can't go to their bosses. They phone me up to ask me where to go. I mean, that is a sad, sad indictment of management in the NHS.
And I agree, but there are circumstances, that people I know are afraid of the hierarchy of management, and that's a management problem, by the way. I accept that. The management have to be clear that there has to be total transparency. Can I just ask one last question, if I may, and thank you for the way you've answered my questions. You accept that sometimes there will be allegations unproven. What do you do in these circumstances, which will absorb, how do we establish that, or how would you recommend we establish clarification that something that is an allegation without evidential fact has to be pursued?
Oh, could you give me an example of something?
I can't.
Like that?
No, I'm just asking the information because, throughout my business life, I've had, customers, employees allege things, and then you spend a lot of time going through it, as you should. Mm-hmm. But I mean, how would you handle? I mean, we accept that sometimes there will be allegations that are not fulfilled. Yeah,
well, as I say, I've been getting these phone calls from people who have, been bullied, and I listen to their stories, and it seems to me that their stories have a real ring of truth about them, and there should be channels available for them to pursue this. But as I say, this confidential alert line seems to be very, very poor indeed. They just phone it up and they give them a lot of waffle and refer them back to their employer. What help is that? That's useless.
Say I was going to have one last. Are you telling me these people are not trained to answer, and pay proper, compassionate attention to the questions that are raised or the issues that are raised?
Well, the experience I've had and the stories I've been told from various nurses and people who have been employed in the NHS is that they are not getting the support that they need.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now to other members for questions and points. Any other member wish to make a point to our witness? Could I perhaps then, John Wilson?
Mr Wilson, thank you for coming along this morning. Thanks for your petition. You've just said that the final statement there, staff don't know who to turn to in relation to support and how to take forward the issues raised by the compromise agreements. You've made in your submission a comment about the unions and the role of the unions in this whole role. Now, employees, or the majority of employees in the NHS, are protected or are members of either a union, whether that be a trade union or through the BMA, GMC or whoever, in terms of their working practices. Could you advise me whether or not, based on your submission, you feel that these organisations, the unions, the professional bodies, are not protecting the members from the nature of these compromise agreements that are being enforced upon them by NHS boards?
I think unions are far too willing to just immediately, go along with a compromise agreement and just get a quick deal done for someone to leave quietly by the back door, and they don't want to fight people's cases. They should be fighting a lot harder for workers' rights in these circumstances, and not just coming to a cosy deal that suits them and suits the employer, but ruins the worker's life, because they leave and they are very unlikely to be employed again because of these things. And the union should be fighting a lot harder for these people.
Okay, thank you for your response.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to raise a question to Mr Wilson? Perhaps my final question then is, Mr Wilson, what explanation, if any, have you had from health boards about their use of confidentiality clauses?
Well, I mean, I can only go by the figures that are available there, that have been that have came to light through various freedom of information requests, usually submitted by MSPs, I may add, who have done great work. MSPs in this building have done great work to try and unravel what's going on here and get to the nub of the figures and the information needed. So through these freedom of information requests, I've got to know the amount of numbers relating to compromise agreements and the number of confidentiality clauses therein. And we can, as I say, extrapolate the amount of public money that is being frittered away on these compromise agreements. So the figures are out there. I have some basic figures, but as to what individual health boards do and why they do this is a bit of a mystery, I think.
Right. Well, could I also just re-emphasise, if there's any information that you have or any of the colleagues in the gallery today have that you'd like the committee to see, please make sure that the committee has a look at that material, because it's important that we make decisions with the fullest possible information. As you probably know from your experience, the point we now come to is that we go to summation where the committee makes a decision about the next step with your petition. So we sort of finish the sort of evidence sections, but if you can just hold on for a second until we look at the next stages. The committee has been given various options. I certainly think it's important that we seek further information from Scottish Government about your petition. I think my own view is it's also important perhaps to consult the Scottish Health Council, who I understand are a committee of the Health Improvement Scotland, who've got an important role for really the consumer voice in health services in Scotland. But again, as always, it's up to the committee to make the final decisions. John Wilson?
Could I, based on my question, suggest we also write to Unison, the General Medical Council, the Royal College of Nursing and the British Medical Association to seek their views, because it won't just be people in the front line, it will be also consultants and other staff that may be affected by these compromise agreements, and it would be useful to get the views of these organisations on how they perceive these compromise agreements being used.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Anne McTaggart and then Chick Brodie.
Thanks, Convener. In light of the evidence that we have received today, and thank you, Mr Wilson, could we possibly write to Public Concern at Work to have their say on the evidence that we have received today?
Thank you. David Torrance?
Quite happy to go along with
sorry,
John.
I apologise. I called Chick Brodie first. Sorry, Chick Brodie.
I just wonder, I mean, I support what you said, Convener, but I just wonder, based on the requirement for evidence, that perhaps we should be asking the National Confidential Alert Line to produce, indeed, a monthly report ask the government or Health Improvement Scotland to do that. Also feel that perhaps we should consider asking Audit Scotland to review that after a period of time, let's say after a year, just to see what is actually happening in health boards across Scotland.
Yes, sorry, Mr Wilson, we're at the stage now. We need no decision. David Torrance?
Along with the recommendation.
Amit Taggart?
Just another point. Could the committee gain some information from the UK government?
Sure. We could write to Secretary of State for Health or the relevant health authorities in Westminster about that. Yeah. On the terms of the petition.
Yes.
Okay. Carol. Angus MacDonald.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. I'm aware that the Health Secretary, Alec Neil, made an announcement at the Scottish Patient Association's conference in June that 200,000 would be made available to health boards to establish further measures to tackle bullying and harassment in NHS Scotland. I'm just curious, only 6 boards made bids for the funding: Ayrshire and Arran, Golden Jubilee, NHS 24, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, Tayside and Carstairs. I'm just curious if it's maybe worth contacting them to ask them why they made the initial bid for funding in the first place, and basically just see what response comes back, and whether that has made any impact since they've received the funding.
I think that's a good point. Now, do members have any other suggestions for options that we haven't currently touched on?
Yeah, I think if we're writing, did we say we're writing the health boards? Well, we're about to write to 6 of them. Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, I'd like to know what management training they're doing in this particular area, each of the health boards, and how much I don't want to know how much they're spending. I want to know how they establish the outcome that eliminates this scar from the relationship between management and employees.
Yeah. I mean, clearly health boards will have an important role there, but also there'll be some guidance from Scottish Government on this as well, either done through Chief Executive letters
I understand that.
Yeah, but no, I'm just trying to identify who you want to write to. Is it Scottish Government or is it?
This is only going to be solved at the coalface, and we can have organisations, Scottish Government, participating in this. But at the end of the day, the problem has to be solved between primarily problem of management, and therefore that's where the problem lies, and clearly the culture has to be changed as quickly as possible.
So I'm just trying to identify, do you wish us to write to all the health boards in Scotland? That's the only point. Are members agreeable to the course of action I think each of us have identified, which is a number of tasks that we have to pursue? Angus MacDonald?
I mean, just to differentiate, if we are writing to all the health boards, we have to note the 6 boards that bid for the funding.
Yeah, yes, so we have to distinguish between the 6 that went for the funding and the others. Yeah, that's a fair point. Well, thank the committee then for the various recommendations. Mr Wilson, I think you've identified that we're obviously very enthusiastic. We'll make sure we pursue your petition. We're doing as much homework as we can, and obviously we'll take this back to a future committee, particularly once we've got all the raw material back. The clerks will obviously keep you up to date with development, and I would encourage anybody who's associated with your petition, as I said earlier, to write to us with anything additional that they wish us to know about. And can I thank you very much for putting your evidence in such a forthright way. Clearly you've been through a very difficult experience, and that was reflected, I think, in your statement. But we do appreciate your honesty in being so upfront with the committee. And I'll suspend for 2 minutes to allow Mr Wilson to leave. Thank you very much. If I can restart our committee, I've just been informed that the two next sets of witnesses have both been delayed in traffic, and my intention is to take them once they arrive. With the committee's permission, I would jump to agenda item 3, consideration of current petitions. Would that be agreeable? Yes. Thank you. So the first petition we're dealing with this slot on the agenda is PE 1319 by William Smith and Scott Robertson on improving youth football in Scotland. Members of a note by the clerk and submissions. Could also just refer members to my declaration of interest where I'm a trustee of Inverness Caledonian Thistle FC. I've also had information from, thank you, from Ian Gray and Joanne Lamont, who both got an interest in this particular petition. The members will know, I think a number of members have got particular interest in the football side of this petition, but I think in sum, I think this is about an issue about the effective employment of young people. There's a lot of good work being done by William Smith and Scott Robertson on this particular issue. Before we go to the next steps in terms of how we deal with it, could I just throw it open to members to get any views on next steps in terms of options for action?
Can I also declare, it's not personal interest, but one of my staff, well, it's not my staff, but contracted staff, runs the whole youth division for Hibs.
Okay, thank you for that. Does any member want to contribute for suggest some possible ways forward in this petition? There's been a lot of work done, I think, by the Children's Commissioner, Tam Bailey, in this, and he's, in the papers you'll see he's been asked to be kept informed. And I think in the previous session he came and gave evidence to the committee. Members will also know that Scottish football has been reorganised, and the SPFL is obviously one of the key organisations. The chief executive of that is Neil Doncaster, who also understand is a board member of the European Professional Football Leagues as well now, which obviously is crucially important. I think it is important to try and invite some of the key players in Scottish football and the Children's Commissioner to come along and speak to us about this issue. It's much wider than just football. There's issues around European Convention of Human Rights. There's issues about employment, fair movement of trade and so on. The other side of the coin is, of course, we understand, I think we all understand, that it is vitally important to develop and build up facilities for youth football, and the clubs that invest in that need to get some return. So we have to look at both sides of this, but my suggestion to you is that we do invite some of these key players to come along. I think there was also a suggestion of Malcolm McGregor, who's a well-known advocate, done a lot of work on sports, to attend as well. But again, it's up to committee members whether they feel that is an appropriate response to the petition. You know, I have quite strong views on that, but obviously I appreciate members may have differing views. Chip Brodie.
Yeah, I agree. True story is I was actually talking to somebody who's involved as a scout for one of our clubs, but also he scouts for a club down south. And when I heard the sums of money that are being paid to 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds, or not paid directly to them, of course, it's absolutely unacceptable. I mean, the way Scottish football is going, despite its reorganisation, when one reads the headlines this morning, there's a collision waiting to happen in terms of the funding of Scottish football. And I don't see why there shouldn't be an appropriate mechanism for certainly encouraging children, but not treating them at the age of 12 as if they're professional footballers. So I would certainly agree that we get some meaningful advice from those involved as to what the way forward is. I certainly would encourage those that administer Scottish football to be invited along to give their information.
And thank you for that. And the one, if I just say, the one that, or a couple that I missed, there's also a suggestion that we invite Andrew McKinley, who's written back to us, who's the Director of Governance and Regulation at the SFA, who's obviously got a lot of experience in this issue. John Wilson?
Mayor, can I just seek for clarification, as you're the one that's proposing that we have witnesses before us. We've had a number of these witnesses before this committee in January 2011. Now, what we've been advised in terms of the briefings we have before us today is that the a paper has been produced and will be put to the SPFL board in January 2014. It's whether or not we hold off till that paper is presented to the board in 2014, and we then invite a number of people to discuss the implications of the paper that may be or may not be finally agreed, given the recent history of the SPFL and getting club agreement on particular issues. But clearly, I am concerned at some of the rates, the money that's changing hands for, and when we see the scale of the reimbursement that's taking place, as Mr Brodie said, not to the children themselves, because in many respects some of them are still children, but to the parents, to actually tie them in or indenture them to a club beyond any scope. And I know that when we discussed this previously, that some young people are losing out on a football career because they cannot play for a school club, a local youth team, or any other football practice. The club will not let them do that. So it is about trying to find out what the SPFL are going to bring forward as their suggestions, and maybe after January 2014 invite the individuals you've named along to an event where we can have a round-table discussion on the future of youth football in Scotland and the way the clubs are restricting the practice of young players to play football.
Yeah, I think that's a sensible point. I think it is important we take on board the sort of timescale of this paper going to the SPFL/SFA in January 2014. So I'd be perfectly happy to wait until that paper had been discussed before we have any roundtable event. Chip Brodie?
Yeah, just coming back to one of the recommendations that we invite a head of youth from a club other than from an old firm club. I don't know why the old firm would be excluded, because they clearly have a fairly significant impact on both within the corridors of power of Scottish football and indeed just by their financial clout. And we've just talked about openness and transparency. It's slightly disingenuous to look at the letter that earlier this year from the SPL, which says you seem to be advocating a system whereby clubs would be free to register young players without the payment of any training contribution. I mean, I'd like to understand what that training contribution is for, because some of the sums of money that I've heard of, that must be some training.
Thank you. As far as your point goes about head of youth of professional club, I think it was a suggestion from the petitioners. It wasn't the old firm. I can understand what they're saying, but I'm totally relaxed about involving the old firm as well as some of the all-known, as well as involving teams that are not in the old firm as well in Scotland. So that's a suggestion by the petitioner. It's purely up to the committee what we do. Anne McTaggart.
Thanks, Convener. And I think at this stage I'll make a disclosure that I'm totally disinterested on football. However, I'm extremely keen on listening to and receiving more information about some of the practices that happens within round table. I think wait until after January until we receive the report, as my colleague John Wilson has mentioned. That would be a much better idea. But I think a round table experience to share some of this knowledge, practice and education would be of benefit before we can make any decision.
Thank you for that. Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Convener. I certainly agree with John Wilson's suggestion that there should be a round-table discussion. I'm sure there are a number of viewpoints, and the more people that we can get in and around the table to discuss the issue, of which there are a few, would certainly be welcome. And clearly, John Wilson's other suggestion that we wait until early next year is certainly advisable.
Does any other member have any other course of action? Are members then happy to go ahead on the basis of the timescale that John Wilson suggested and the various individuals that we have suggested? Is that John Wilson?
Convener, just to take on Chuck Brodie's point about the Old Firm, we did have the Old Firm before the committee in January 2011. We did receive some criticism from some of the other clubs that we had actually concentrated in the Old Firm. And certainly I know that Hibs and Hearts and some of the other teams in the league have very active youth programmes. And I know that Falkirk, for instance, has from the age of 4 upwards, and I think even younger, in relation to getting young people into football. It is about trying to widen it out, and I would suggest, and given that Hearts apparently have got a very active youth development wing, that it might be a suggestion to bring 1 or 2 of these clubs in front of us, because while the Old Firm do have a great deal of influence, it would be useful to find out what's happening and what restrictions may be in place, because I have heard that some young people, as they are developing through if they're signed to a major club, find it more difficult to go and sign up for some of the other clubs who would want to participate in that development. So my suggestion would be either Hearts or Hibs and possibly Falkirk in relation to their youth development programme, just to find out how the youth development programme fits in with the overall issue that's been dealt with in this petition.
Can I just the rationale for not excluding the Old Firm, or one of the Old Firm, is because the spectrum of finance in Scottish football is, and the gap is so huge. And it would be interesting, even Hibs and Hearts, Hearts, I don't know how relatively well off or not they are, depending on which paper you read. But I think we need to look at the gap as to, and we'll probably find in this round table, and I agree with the round table discussion, is that those at the more lucrative ends have a totally different development policy and set totally different expectations for children, in both in boys and girls increasingly, than let's say, I wouldn't say Inverness Cali, but perhaps some other teams, not necessarily in the first in the Premier League. So.
Yeah, we've got Falkirk. Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that's clear, and we'll go ahead and get that action as soon as the meeting in January takes place. So thank you for that. Can I now go back to the second new petition, which is PE 1496 by Alan Wiley? I think Mr Wiley's in the building. And so this is on behalf of No to Bedroom Tax campaign on bedroom tax mitigation. Members have a note by the clerk. Members have a note by the clerk, the spice briefing, and the petition. Jackie Bailey MSP has expressed an interest in the petition, but I'm not sure she's able to attend today. But could I welcome Mr Wiley to the committee today? I understand you've had some transport problems, Mr Wiley, but
yes,
I'm glad you're here. If I could ask you to make a short presentation of a maximum of 5 minutes, and then we'll move to questions. I'll kick off with a couple and then ask my colleagues to take place. So, Mr Wiley.
I probably should introduce myself. My name's Alan Wiley, and I represent No to Bedroom Tax campaign. We're a modern, organic campaign which incorporates online stuff in traditional political activism. We've got 3 main objectives that can be split up into 2 groups, political and civic. We help and support people who are affected by the bedroom tax and other welfare reforms. Because we are online, they can come directly towards us, and we can be a hub, and we can direct them to the experts who can help them. Our political aims are to mitigate the bedroom tax and to ultimately end the bedroom tax, and that's why I'm here today, to mitigate the bedroom tax. At present, there's £35 million in the system to mitigate the bedroom tax in Scotland, but the shortfall is £53 million. This shortfall has led to inconsistencies between local authorities when dealing with discretionary housing payments, which is resulting in some of the most vulnerable tenants being left without any support. Shelter Scotland says that the money in the system will help 7 out of 10 Scottish tenants. I'm here on behalf of the 3 that aren't getting any support from the councils or from any other sources. This money would cover the tenants' rent, the extra rent for the bedroom tax. It would result in tenants being protected, every tenant in Scotland being protected from the bedroom tax. It would also protect housing associations and local authority budgets. For example, Renfrewshire estimates we lose £1.8 million from lost revenue from the betting tax. This can be solved with this petition. When the betting tax came in April, there was a big national uproar, and a lot of people didn't know what to do. There's been a lot of scared people out there, and even now, when you're in the streets, they're asking you for help, and you say, have you applied for DHP? And they're, I don't know, what's that? This can be seen in Edinburgh, where 50% of those affected by a betting tax haven't applied for any help. This shows that the tenants are scared, and because they're scared, they're not interacting with their landlords, and that can have problems down the line. When I speak to people, the fear is evictions, but it's more debt. It's the debt that this brings. When you have rent arrear debts, they can take you off the housing list. I know that's been looked at, but a lot of people are just scared that these debts are going to hang over them, and this petition would get rid of those debts.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. Do you have any figures for the level of rent arrears attributable to bedroom tax for each of the local authorities in Scotland and social landlords as well?
Costler done a research, and I'm sure it said 20 million was for the local authorities. I don't think I've actually got that numbers on me. I apologise.
That's all right. I wasn't expecting necessarily to have a chapter and verse for every local authority. If you do have that figures, it would certainly be useful to send that into the committee. The other question I had was, I think it was on your petition that you mentioned, if I understood it correctly, that 79% of affected households have a disabled person within the household. I suppose at one level I probably would have expected that. That's a very high number, and that's going to really adversely affect people who are in many ways very vulnerable in society in Scotland.
The bedroom tax, it does affect, as you say, some of the most vulnerable, and there's support out there, but the support's not enough to help everybody, whereas this petition would result in support for every tenant. But as you say, it does particularly attack the disabled community. I think the Citizens Advice does research, and it's 80% are disabled or have a disabled person in the household, and we need to. That's why you'd get people that, when you speak to people, it's a lot of people that are saying it doesn't affect me directly, but I'm against it. Because the people it does affect are people who are quite isolated and quite vulnerable, and that's one aspect of the bedroom tax which is really vicious and
I mean, clearly some local authorities, I think you pointed this out in your petition, some local authorities have taken a sort of no eviction policy, and that obviously is important, but the wider issue, of course, is some mitigation is required as well, because obviously local authorities also have a general duty under Audit Scotland to make sure that rent arrears are reduced. Clearly, that was a policy was identified before we had bedroom tax, but would you agree some sort of comprehensive policy is required, and it's not just a single tier one?
I think that there needs to be uniformity between local authorities, just dealing with the whole shebang. Because, as I said earlier, in some local authorities they regard DLA as income, and others they don't, and that means that some disabled people are being barred from getting discretionary housing payments due to them being disabled. So we do need a uniformity along the lines, and no evictions. I'm not a lawyer. People are really scared about getting evicted, though. There's a fear.
And the final point before I ask my colleagues to come in is we had a similar petition earlier this year, and we referred this on to the Welfare Reform Committee purely because they were actively looking at this. I mean, generally the committee isn't a simple referral organisation. You know, as you probably know, we try and do as much as we can for each petition. The exception being where we have another committee having an active work programme. It's obviously a matter for the committee, and it's not quite at this stage yet, but what's your own view about the Welfare Reform Committee looking in more detail at your petition?
Yes. I think there needs to be a degree of urgency, because we're getting to that time of the year when it is, it's getting cold and the energy prices are skyrocketing. food prices are skyrocketing, and the bedroom tax is it's a line in the sand. It's the straw that's breaking the camel's back, so they say, and people are struggling, and that's why I think it needs to be some urgency to get help pretty much immediately.
Thank you very much for that. And I bring my colleagues in. Chip Brody.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Wiley. Hello, Alan. I've had the pleasure of sharing platforms with Mr. Wiley, and very constructive they have been for some 6-7 months now. And we both share the view this bedroom tax, under occupancy tax, is iniquitous, and as I say, we committed some time ago that this should be removed, and certainly will be removed if we have the power to do so. Mr. Wiley, I think after the last budget, you indicated that you were, to me, that you were thrilled that we got the 20 million, which increased to 20 million. I mean, you do know that the Scottish Government have a limitation on what they can actually do because of the reserve powers under welfare reform which have been applied in this particular case.
I think that when the budget was announced, we live in a time of politics. It's quite dour and dire, and sometimes it's just outright poisonous. That good acts have to be applauded. You know, I think Shelter asked in 1 week for the increase in DHP, and the next week the Scottish Government done that. And I think at the time that needs to be applauded. That should be applauded. I think I said at the time the Scottish Government stepped up to the plate. So to extend that analogy, you stepped up to the plate, but you didn't hit a home run in third base. So we're helping at the plate. What's been done by the Scottish Government has been really, really good. You know, it has been proactive, but it's not helping everybody. And
there's a limitation because of the reserve powers that the increment beyond 20.1 million, which was afforded in the budget, is not feasible under the existing legislation.
I don't. I think that I think if there's a will, there's a way. I appreciate with any form of medication, you're going to have your positives and your negatives, and with this form, with financial form, there's a legitimate argument that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but I don't agree with that argument. I think that it's about priorities. It's what governments do. Governments, they decide policies, they cost it, they fund it, and then they go with it. I trust that the Scottish Government and this Parliament as a whole will make the right choice if it can be done.
Yeah, that's the point. It can be done. A similar situation last year in terms of being instructed by Westminster to apply pension increase the pension fees, and the suggestion was that if we didn't do it, then monies would be withheld by the Westminster Government, which would then impact what we collectively, not just SNP, collectively want to see in Scotland. So there is a penalty for not following, as much as we regret it, for not following the powers that exist in the Scotland Act.
I just go back. I think if there's a will, there's a way. If it can't be done, then I truly apologise for wasting your time.
And I accept that. But can I just ask? I mean, currently a £33 million Scottish Welfare Fund was made available. It's been set up to administer community care grants and crisis grants. What's your understanding of the uptake of that?
I'm not too sure. I do know that I believe it's 233 million the Scottish Government's given to mitigate welfare reforms over the next 3 years, and that's a lot of money. And it's a bit of cheek me coming back asking for more, but I'm asking for more for the right reasons, because there are people out there that need help, that are not getting the help that's needed.
I would be the last person, as I say, having shared a platform with you, not understanding your motivation, which is highly commendable, and I'm sure we share that. But there are restrictions, but we have tried to make funds available. Do you think the local authorities are doing enough to communicate what is available to those that are either suffering rent arrears or not taking up welfare fund?
I don't think it's be unfair to have a blanket opinion on all of them. Some are very good and very proactive. Others are not as proactive as others. They seem that they could do more. They could do more.
How do you think we should persuade them to do more?
Protesting.
How do you think we should persuade them to do more?
I've been emailing councillors asking them to do more. I've been lobbying them. On some occasions you get some success, and others you don't. It's just keep trying and keep trying, chipping away and hoping to get something.
Thank you. Angus MacDonald.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mr Wiley. I think it's fair to say that there's very few people in this Parliament who don't have a great deal of sympathy with your petition. However, following on from Chick Brodie's points, I understand it that as I understand it, your petition is calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to do something that it legally can't do. As you're aware, and as Chick Brodie alluded to, there's a legal maximum as to how much the Scottish Government can top up the Scottish discretionary housing payment budget, hence the 20 million figure announced by John Swinney that we have. So the legal maximum, again, as I understand it, is set by statutory instrument made under Section 70 of the Child Support, Pensions and Social Security Act 2000, which was incidentally introduced by the Labour government when Alistair Darling was the Work and Pension Secretary. So it's a case of we would if we could. Have you any suggestions as to how the Scottish Government can get round the legal constraint? I mean, it's all very well to have priorities, as you mentioned earlier, but if we have legal constraints on these priorities, how do we get round it? I mean, and can I just qualify that by saying it is frustrating for everybody?
Yeah, I totally appreciate it. I was given advice that you could make a prevention homeless fund, or that the monies could be directed to the social registered landlords as a supplement for their income. So there's more mechanisms to get the money into the system rather than just discretionary housing payments, which I do appreciate. It's already at the maximum, but it's different mechanisms. Or at least I was advised it's different mechanisms that the money could be put into the system.
Yeah, and are you aware if Shelter, for example, have fed this into the Scottish Government as a suggestion?
I spoke to Shelter, and I spoke to them just after the budget, and they were quite happy about how things were there and then. They said that they were just going to see how things panned out. But I'm not too sure. I'm not in that deep contact with them.
Thank you. Anne McTaggart.
Thanks, Convener, and thank you, Mr Wiley, for your presentation. Wholeheartedly, fully agree with what you're asking for here, and we don't normally stray into political territory in a sense. However, for this occasion I will. I fully agree with you that our present government do have other ways and means, and if there is a will, there is a way. You have mentioned some of, I'll describe that for some of my colleagues. Pay local government and the housing associations, like you had mentioned earlier, the funding to do that. But you're exactly right. Where there is a will, there is a way.
Thank you.
I've
John Wilson.
expressed that.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Mr Wiley, for coming along. And I think other members have already said it in the committee. We have every sympathy with the petition. It's how we deal with the shortfall. And I just want a clarification from yourself in terms of what the shortfall is. Now, my understanding is the Scottish Government have set aside £20 million. The Department of Work and Pensions have set aside, if I forget the figure correctly, £13.47 million. Taking these two figures together, based on the figure that was calculated previously of a £50 million shortfall, that leaves a gap of £16.3 million Is that your estimate of the figure that's required?
That's number, yeah.
16.3 million. Can I seek further clarification based on Anne McTaggart's assertion that there are other ways that the Scottish Government can actually get round and have what's currently been put in place by a Westminster Government in terms of a bedroom tax? It reminds me of the debate about the tax varying powers that the people of Scotland voted for in 1997 as part of the setting up of this Parliament. The then UK Government indicated to the Scottish people that if the Scottish Parliament or the Scottish Government decided to use those tax varying powers, the money would be clawed back. Whether they decided to raise or reduce by 3 pence in the pound, that money would be clawed back by the UK Treasury. Would you not therefore see, that if the Scottish Government did try to bypass the proposals or the instituted by the UK Government, that the UK Government could then cut the Scottish Government block allocation, which means that expenditure in other areas may be affected by the decision of the UK Government, not by the decisions of the Scottish Government?
I think that goes back to a negative or a ramification of financial mitigation. I do see your point of view, because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, basically. But my argument is that governments do that. That's what governments do. They decide a budget and they fund the budget and they go for it. I do take your point, because it is a legitimate argument. It's just not one that I agree with on this point.
It's fine to use the analogy, rob Peter to pay Paul, but in this situation, we're actually talking about paying Paul and the Scottish Government being robbed of an allocation of resources from the UK Government, because the Scottish Government has actually carried out that or taken forward that decision to give the additional 13.6 million to local authorities or to social landlords to try and bypass a piece of legislation that was introduced by a Westminster Government.
Again, I appreciate your point. I trust if the Scottish Government did find this money, that whatever budget it comes out of, I trust the Scottish Government to use a common sense approach so it doesn't have negative ramifications. I do have the trust that the Scottish Government would do that. They wouldn't take the money out without hurting somebody, take the money out of another budget that could hurt another sector or another stakeholder. I've got trust in politicians that they can make the sensible choice, the common sense approach. Sorry.
As I said, Convener, what we're asking for is mitigation against a policy direction that's been carried out by Westminster, and I have no doubt, given the pilot yesterday introduced in Inverness for the universal credit, we'll see other demands possibly being made on the Scottish Government to offset the losses that will be made by many families throughout Scotland once universal credit comes in. And potentially this could just be the thin edge of the wedge of asking the Scottish Government to actually carry out mitigation measures for policies that are being pursued by a Westminster Government. Thank you.
Anne McTaggart.
Convener, I'm failing to get a grasp of the difference between the UK Government imposing sanctions on the Scottish Government and the Scottish Government imposing sanctions on local authorities, of whom by are trying to rectify this issue as best as they can.
Sorry, carry on.
Mr Wiley is exactly right. Where there's a will, there is a way.
Can I say,
John Wilson?
Just for clarification, Convener, my understanding is the Scottish Government is not imposing sanctions. It's the UK Government that's imposed sanctions on those individuals who have what the UK Government determine overcapacity in bedrooms. The Scottish Government are trying to mitigate against the sanctions being imposed by Westminster. The Scottish Government has not imposed any sanctions on any. They have not imposed any sanctions in relation to the bedroom tax.
Thank I won't draw Mr Wiley into this point. I did indicate earlier that Jackie Bailey had an interest in this but was unable to attend at the time. I'm glad we've got now Jackie Bailey with us. I understand Jackie Bailey's got a bill, a member's bill, which has, may have an impact in this particular area. The background very quickly is I explained to Mr Wiley earlier that previous petition we'd referred to the Welfare Reform Committee because the convener was very keen that was part of their work cycle. It would make sense if the committee agree that we do refer this petition to that. Normally we're not just a referral committee, and we obviously want to give everyone a clear time to put their case, and a number of members have asked quite detailed questions about that. So that's where we're currently at. Would you like to make a brief couple of points?
If I might, Convener, and I apologise to the committee for arriving late. I did arrive in time to hear John Wilson's contribution, and I wonder whether I could pick up with Alan some of those points. I'm not sure whether Mr Wiley knows that Danny Alexander, who's the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, was before the Parliament, before one of the committees, and he was very clear that it was up to the Scottish Government what they did with their money in terms of mitigation, and that there would be no clawback. Were you aware of that, and does that offer you some comfort that the UK Government won't claw back from the Scottish Government the money?
I was aware of him saying that. I did see that in the press reports, and that gives me some. I'm a little more relaxed after hearing what he says, but yeah, I did hear him say that, yeah.
Okay. The other observation I would make is that having spoken to some of our local government colleagues, I know they're very supportive of your petition, and COSLA certainly supported it, but I understand the existing money from the Scottish Government, the 20 million, which is very welcome, wasn't ring-fenced. So actually local authorities who have already topped up could use that money for some other purpose. Does that not demonstrate that they actually have the power to provide the money, and local government has the power itself to make payments, whether it's through, say, a housing sustainability fund or a homelessness fund or anything of that order?
The mechanism is not really important. It's the money. I do believe there's different mechanisms to go through. As you mentioned, I think that maybe due to the low take-up of DHP, it would be best for them if the money did go to social registered landlords in some sort of income supplement for income, and that would reduce the need for tenants to contact them. But there's different mechanisms, I do believe, for our local authorities to help. Yeah.
So, finally, Convener, in your view, is there anything to stop the Scottish Government from making the 50 million available in terms of mitigation of the bedroom tax, which I think we would all agree is quite a horrendous tax?
It's their own choice. It's their own choice.
Okay. Thank you, Mr Wiley. Can I bring in Chip Brodie and then John Wilson?
I'll try and forget that very selective rewriting of Ms Bailey's understanding of the Section 70 of the Child Support, Pensions and Social Security Act. It's always good, I say, Ms Bailey, to come and draw a picture, albeit very late. I wonder, Alan, if Mr Wiley, what analysis has been done about the cost of raising the bedroom taxes against the amount of money that's being dispensed? Have you asked any of the local authorities, North Lanarkshire, for example, what would be involved in the cost of actually distributing the bedroom tax versus the amount of money they've received?
No, I haven't. I don't particularly understand your question. I'm sorry.
Well, the rationale for this, there was a report in the papers on Sunday that the cost of bedroom tax, cost of actually chasing bedroom tax, the cost of applying bedroom tax was actually a lot more than the money that was received by councils. Yes, because if they did go down the road of evictions, that costs more. But yeah, it's just, I think that this money covers just the rent. So there's been administration costs by housing associations and local authorities since then that is added to this, but this money just covers the rent. I just think it's worthwhile asking that question because we all agree, again, albeit some lately, but how iniquitous this tax is. But it makes a nonsense of it if it actually is generating more cost than the monies that are available.
You're 100% right. it doesn't save money. I think most people do that at the beginning. The government initially said it saves money, but it doesn't, because it's just moving the responsibility from the central government to local government and housing associations and tenants. They said that it improves the housing system, which it doesn't neither. And the bed and tax makes no sense. It makes no sense, and it costs a lot of money, and it costs a lot to our communities. It's hurting a lot of people, and I know it's not. I do appreciate that it doesn't emanate from this Parliament. The only place you can stop it is in Westminster. But coming here is a plea for help for the tenants that aren't got any protection at the moment.
I'm very short of time, but I'd like to bring in John Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. Just to ask Mr Wylie a couple of points that Ms Bailey referred to. One point was about the £50 million from the Scottish Government. In an earlier answer, Mr Wylie, you indicated the shortfall. You agreed with me that the shortfall was really £13.3 million rather than the £30 million that may be alluded to by Ms Bailey. And I wonder if you'd want to confirm that the overall cost in relation to offsetting the bedroom tax would be £50 million, that £20 million has currently been set aside by the Scottish Government to assist local authorities, albeit that £20 million isn't ring-fenced, which might be an issue that we can take up at a later date. But the £13.6 million that's been allocated by the DWP to give discretionary housing payments to local authorities does give us currently a working total of £37.6 million, and the short 36 point, getting figures right here, but round about £36 million, and the real shortfall was about £13 million.
That is as far as I was concerned, it was approximately £35 million in the system at the moment, and the shortfall was 53. That was what was estimated at the.
While we've run out of time, I got the impression that we could keep this going for another few hours, but certainly thank you very much for coming along. If you could just hold on for a couple of minutes. The next point is the committee goes into summation mode, which means that we then discuss which options are open to committee. I still think it was important that we raised a whole series of questions and just merely refer this matter on to the Welfare Reform Committee. Having said that, my view is that we should now refer this petition to the Welfare Reform Committee because they are actively considering this as we speak. But nevertheless, I did find your contributions very helpful, and we had a variety of questions from members, but I think it was important that we had put these questions to you and we got some answers as well. Can I ask the committee whether they agree with my recommendation that we refer this to Welfare Reform Committee? And could I thank you coming along, Mr Wylie. Obviously, Welfare Reform Committee will keep you up to date with developments. Can I also thank Jackie Bailey for coming along. I know Jackie Bailey has taken a great interest in these matters and appreciate her comments to you as well. So thank you very much, and I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow Mr Wylie to leave. Thank you. If we can restart, if we can restart the committee, with the committee's approval, I'm going to go to the second current petition because our petitioners who are due to give evidence have been delayed in traffic, and they will be here, I'm advised, shortly. So the second current petition is PE 1443 by Maureen Sharkley on behalf of the Scottish Care, Information and Miscarriage on investigating the cause of miscarriage. Members of a note by the clerk and submissions. I think Maureen Sharkley recently was in the Parliament when she had one of the stalls in the Parliament, and I think certainly it was a very, very good petition. The petitioner, as you know, believes that the current guidelines do not allow women to be responded to and urges the Scottish Government to change its policy on this. However, I think the Scottish Government has made it quite clear that it supports the current Royal College guidelines, and the organisations do not support an investigation of the offer of testing for women following a single miscarriage for the reasons set out in the responses. Unfortunately, I can't personally see any other way forward for this, although I would put on record my thanks to Maureen Sharkley and her colleagues for, I think, the excellent petition that she's put forward. In the end of the day, we can only deal with the material that we have, and everybody we've written to has had a very clear view on this. Obviously, I'll welcome any other view from members, but I can see no other way forward other than closing the petition under Rule 15.7. But as always, I will defer to members' views and expertise in this issue. John Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not minded to close this petition today, and the reason why I'm minded not to close it is on the basis of the response from the Royal College of General Practitioners. Now, they were asked a question about the emphasis on patient-centred care, and then they gave a response in relation to the patients' responses to miscarriage varies hugely. We know that. But the issue then go on to say the scientific guidelines endorsed by our colleagues. Now, an individual's needs at a time of a trauma needs to be assessed by the individual patient and the individual, how they react to that. And that, for my mind, doesn't mean that they're endorsing patient-centred care. Basically, what they're doing is doing a scientific analysis on whether or not testing should be carried out. Now, the evidence we've received from the petitioners is that an individual can go through up to 3 miscarriages before they're then allowed to be tested under the present guidance. And I would argue, Convener, that we need to go back to the principle, the basic principle of patient-centred care, and where a patient has, in the first instance, suffered a miscarriage, that should be their right to request that tests be carried out to get to the root cause of the problem and to find out whether or not there would be any further issues in their medical future that may lead to further miscarriages. And therefore, I would suggest, Convener, that we write to the Royal College of General Practitioners, and we also write to the Scottish Government to seek assurances and clarification about what is the definition of patient-centred care and whether or not a patient would have the right to demand that the appropriate tests be carried out prior to suffering from either a second or third miscarriage, if those circumstances were to happen. So I would suggest my recommendation, Convener, would be that we do write back to the Scottish Government and we do write to the Royal College of General Practitioners to seek guidance on whether or if a patient has a right to be tested at their request.
Thank you for that. Can I just bring Anna McTaggart and then Chip Brodie?
Thanks, Convener. I fully agree with what my colleague John Wilson has just said very eloquently. But can I just bring to the attention and thank the Scottish Care and Information on Miscarriage for their outstanding executive summary. 5,708 women in Scotland each year. This affects, miscarriage affects, and it scares me to think that only 50% of the hospitals have specialised early pregnancy units. It's a worrying statistic, Convener, and I don't think we have finished with this petition yet. I would like to go back to ask the Scottish Government, are they satisfied with that? We have heard from other authorities, and they've obviously not agreed with what the petition is requesting. However, I do want to go back to the Scottish Government to say.
And Chip Brodie?
Yeah. I understand, at least I think I understand the position that was put just so eloquently by my colleague Mr Wilson. But we wrote to the RCGPS in June We wrote to them in our meeting. We agreed to write again to the RC GPS regarding some of the concerns around that. And given the responses to that, okay, there is a problem, they suggested, with numbers, but on the basis of where women experience complications in early pregnancy are given access to an early pregnancy assessment service with care in dedicated areas, then I'm not sure how much further we're going to take all this in terms of what additional answers we expect.
Okay, does any other member who's not spoken want to come in? Angus MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener. I certainly take on board the points raised by John Wilson and Anne McTaggart, and when I looked at the paperwork for this, I personally had been minded to agree to close the petition under Rule 15.7. However, given that some committee members do have concerns and are seeking further information, then I'm certainly happy to agree to that.
David Torrance.
I'm happy to agree for further information, Chair.
Thank you. I think following John Wilson's eloquent comments, then I don't think I have any choice but to support that we pursue this petition to the Scottish Government and the Royal College that you mentioned earlier. Sorry, Anne, do you have a point? Yeah,
really, just to go back on my colleague Chick Brodie's point there, that we have written to a few people and we have had evidence that they think that it's okay, but I'm not quite sure if it's doing what it says on the tin, if they believe that they are covering this. Only 50% of the hospitals are covering it. I don't think that that's adequate enough.
Thank you. So I think what the committee is saying is that we're going to continue the petition and write to the two organisations of Scottish Government and Royal College that John Wilson mentioned, and we'll obviously keep the petitioner involved in terms of future developments. And with the committee's agreement, I will revert back to our third new petition, which is PE 1499 by Robert Watson. Yeah. I'll just suspend for 1 minute to allow our witnesses to take their places. Committee. The third new petition is PE 1499 by Robert Watson on behalf of the What About Us campaign group on creating suitable respite services for younger disabled adults with life-limiting conditions. Members have a note by the clerk, the Spice briefing and the petition. And Jackie Bailey also has an interest in the petition, and she's in the audience with us again. Can I welcome the petitioner, Robert Watson, and Kyle Kelly to the meeting, and can invite Mr Watson to make a short presentation of a maximum of 5 minutes to set the context of the petition. I'll ask a few questions and then I'll move over to my colleagues to ask some further questions. Mr Watson.
Thank you. Is the microphone working okay? Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Right, most of you here in this room had a holiday this year. A chance to go somewhere different, a place you enjoy going to for a breakaway from the usual routine and the stresses of everyday life. Well, that is what a respite break is like for us. How would you then feel if you were told you could never have another holiday ever again? Because that is the reality people like myself and Kyle and their families who care for us now face, following Chaz's decision to withdraw its services for those aged 21 and over, combined with the fact that there are no suitable adult respite facilities for our age group that we can move on to. A respite break is the only type of holiday that a lot of us are able to go on, so to lose the benefits they bring would be devastating. For me, and I'm sure Kyle and most other young adults in the same situation will agree, the benefits of a respite break, it's a chance for me to have a break away from my parents and from the usual routine. I can get up when I want, go to bed when I want, get a shower when I want without having to be set by what time the care workers are due to come in. It's also a chance to socialise with other people my age of the same or similar conditions, and so we can relate to each other. These are friends who, because of how far away we live from each other, I don't get the chance to see at all outside of respite breaks. It really helps us to get away from the isolation we can feel being at home most of the time, and for some of us it's the only chance we get to socialise. Like any other 28-year-old man, I just want to be out socialising and feeling independent, and being on respite gives me an opportunity to do that. Initially, this issue is affecting around 100 young adults and their families. However, as the years go by, the more young people reach the cut-off age of 21, and who knows in the future this might even go down further to probably 18. The number of people needing age-appropriate adult respite services is only going to keep increasing, so it would be better to do something about this situation before things become too desperate. There are no services for people of our age group. There's nothing in between Chaz for children and hospices for older adults in their 50s and 60s who are mainly suffering from cancer and other terminal illnesses. So we are asking, what about us? We seem to be a forgotten group who are stuck in the middle. With advances in medical care and support, many people living with severe physical disabilities such as Duchenne muscular dystrophy are now living significantly longer, and no one seems to have been prepared for this. It seems that as our needs increase, the support available to us seems to decrease, and the adult respite situation is another example of this strange paradox. I've got Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and because it's a progressive condition, as I get older, my health will gradually get worse. But I also have to remember that my parents, they do the vast majority of my care, are also getting older, which means their health is going to get worse too. The average weekday for my dad begins at 6:15 AM. And sometimes by the time my parents have put me to bed, my dad doesn't get to bed until midnight. Then my parents sometimes don't even get a proper night's sleep if I need help during the night. My mum also has Duchenne, albeit a milder form, so sometimes my dad is actually caring for two people. Both my parents have a number of health problems of their own. My mum also has diabetes and my dad has a pacemaker. So respite breaks are vital for my parents to be able to relax, spend some time together as a couple and recharge their batteries. It's in the government's best interest to provide funding for suitable adult respite services, because these breaks enable my parents to continue their caring role long term. Without these breaks, it would become too difficult for my parents to continue caring for me. It would cost the government a lot more money to provide 24/7 care for me. So I hope that I've shown you all just how important it is to so many people that the Scottish Government does something about the lack of adult respite services and facilities. We need quality respite facilities to be created for younger adults living with severe physical disabilities in Scotland. So hopefully with your help, Scotland can lead the way in creating these much needed services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Watson, for coming along, and also to Kyle Kelly, and to say Kyle, if you wish to speak at any time, please let me know, because we want to include you as well in the discussions that we're having. And I know it was a difficult journey for you today. I don't know if this is the first time you've given evidence before the Scottish Parliament Committee, but first, we don't have a certificate for you today, but it's one maybe we should have done. So thanks very much for coming along. I mean, just so I understand it correctly, I mean, is it a combination of lack of facilities for younger adults and also the funding, or is it more about just not having adequate facilities in Scotland for younger adults like yourself?
Well, we did a lot of research and it seemed that there was not really anywhere suitable. The only place that I found that seemed to be suitable was Lucky House, which is out in North Berwick, but they charge £1,000 just for a 4-night stay, so I mean that's just not affordable to the average person. So I suppose if that was cheaper, then that would be an option to use, or if there was more funding available too.
Have you had a look at other examples in other countries like England, Wales, Northern Ireland, or indeed in Europe for examples of best practice?
Not in Europe, but we've looked around the UK. That seems to be a UK-wide problem. There's a lot of sort of children's respite services, but once you reach 18 or 21, they're not allowed to go anywhere, and there doesn't seem to be anywhere to go to address that gap in the middle.
So the real gap then is from children that perhaps have got some coverage, but when you go into the young adult area, that's the gap area across Scotland.
It's like from 21 to about 40, 45 sort of thing. It's hard to define the upper age limit, but I would say sort of early 40s would be, because I say there seems to be services for people in their 50s and 60s with terminal conditions like cancer and that, but nothing in the middle.
Maybe you get establishments that are suitable for you, but the problem is it's not the age group perhaps you want to socialise with, because that was important. I think the sociability aspect was very important. You want people the same age as you are going to be there.
And there's places out there for younger adults with learning disabilities, but nothing suitable for physical disabilities. That's two very different types of disabilities. So
well, I'll bring in some of my colleagues, and once the committee are concluded the questions, I'd like to bring Jackie Bailey in. So I can start with questions from colleagues. Chip Brody.
Good morning, Robert and Kyle. Forgive me for lack of knowledge in terms of how widespread. How many people do you think fall into this category, Robert, in Scotland?
Well, the 100 families that I mentioned are just the families that are affected by Chaz's decision to stop people over 21 going.
Affected by Chaz's decision?
Over 100 for Chaz alone. But out with that, I mean, there's a lot of people with different conditions that don't use Chaz's services. That
you know how many fall into that category?
I don't know numbers, I'm afraid.
I was just trying to scope what the challenge is. Presumably, Chaz's decision is based on finance, or is there any other reason that you're aware of?
We probably need to ask it ourselves, but I think they were saying that because there's so many children using the services, so the numbers that it's in demand is getting higher. So I've been finding that myself, that a lot of the time I don't get as many stays as I used to be, because there's a lot more people that are going there. So I think because of that as well, because a lot of us are much older than the children that are there, I think it's for that reason that they feel. But
thank you. Can I ask if Kyle Kelly, you'd like to say anything at this point, or raise any questions to the committee?
Well, just basically what Robert's saying really is the stuff that I feel as well, but it's just basically the same, really.
Can I then bring in other members of the committee? Any other committee members wish to raise any points? John Wilson.
Convener, thank you. Good morning, Robert. Good morning, Kyle. The issue for me is that, Robert, you mentioned a figure of £1,000 for residential, for a 4-day residential provision. Could I ask what happens now? And I see from your submission that the Minister for Public Health seemed to got confused between respite for yourself and people with your condition and respite for your parents. Now, you indicated, as I said, that while pushing for respite for your parents to go away on a holiday, does that then mean that you need 24/7 care during that respite period that your parents are having?
I would do, but I can't speak for other families, but I know my mum and dad feel that they would rather sort of be at home, having a break themselves, staying at home and me going away somewhere. But,
Done a rough calculation, and if based on 24/7 care, would cost roughly about £1,500 for that 7 days, which would almost equate to a respite break for yourself somewhere with that specialist care provision. So I'm not sure who pays for the cover when your parents have their respite. Is it the local authority that then steps in and provides the funding to provide a carer for the periods that they're not there?
Well, I guess they should, but they don't give anywhere near enough funding for anything like that. The only care we get is 7 mornings a week, 2 hours each day to get me up, with an hour twice a week at night for showers. But I don't know, what's your situation, Kyle? Can you?
Well, during the week, like, I get carers that come in the morning for like an hour or so to get me up and ready, and 45 minutes at night for showers. So
That's all?
yeah, that's all really.
Now, this raises a wider issue in terms of the amount of time, or the time being allocated, or the funding being allocated to provide appropriate care for individuals. And the example I was using was that clearly, if the local authority is picking up for individuals who need 24/7 care, then clearly the money should be there to provide that. But hopefully we can take this petition forward and look at some of the issues arising from that.
Thank you. Taggart.
Thanks, Convener, and thank you, Robert, and thank you, Kyle, for coming along. I had the pleasure of visiting quite recently with Jackie Bailey, actually, Robin House down in Jackie's area, in Ballock, yeah, and what a time that was. It was absolutely wonderful. However, I hear the concern, obviously, that there had, and whilst we were visiting, it had been a lot of younger people there. And then you're concerned that if you go to Lukey House, I also have had constituents that have been to Lukey House and didn't really enjoy it in a sense because they were younger. There seemed to have been an older age group that was kind of in respite in Lukey House. So there is that huge gap, just like you've exactly said, for teenagers and for younger adults to have respite. That is a huge concern because one of the main parts of that is about socialising with your friends and getting together, and yeah. I'll come back in again, Convener, at the end, just really about somebody else that I would want to ask.
Does any other committee member want to come in before I bring in Jackie Bailey? No? Okay, Jackie Bailey.
Thank you very much, Convener, and I was evidently caught in the same traffic jam as you because I arrived moments before you. Could I indicate that this just isn't me supporting this petition? Jim Eadie, my colleague who can't be here today, is equally supportive of the petition, so it commands cross-party support. And I suppose you would describe this as a problem of success, because young people with particular conditions as a result of modern medicine are doing extremely well, and it's great. But it meant that CHAS, which is a children's service, was faced with what do you do in those circumstances where you are a bespoke service for children, you are plugging a gap because that's what you do, but the reality is you need a bespoke service for young adults as well. A lot of the respite provision I've seen takes place in care homes where you've got older people with a variety of different problems. Frankly, it's just not appropriate. And I suspect the request here is, yes, absolutely, for respite care for parents and carers and all of that, but actually it's that respite care for individuals to come together, and it is that kind of bespoke provision that I think we need. We could argue whether it's one centre or two. I look at Chas as a model and say there is much that we can learn from and copy here. And the reality is there is a funding model that already exists, where there is a lead health board that will negotiate with the others for particular children going to Chas. COSLA have also agreed a package that they will negotiate with individual local authorities if a child is going to Chas. That model exists. It shouldn't be beyond us to copy it, but actually to say that for young adults, and you know, you're pushing it, Robert, at 28, you're not a young adult anymore, right? You're well past it. But for people in that age group, you know, to have their own place that isn't kind of full of kids and isn't full of older people, actually is so important, you know, for them and their carers and their families. So the request, you know, is not just of Scottish Government, it's not just about public money, although that matters. It's about the acknowledgement that this is required because people have historically raised funds, they've undertaken campaigns, they've been hugely welcoming of government support, and just a small amount goes a long way. But the revenue package is also there. So it's not just a question of capital. The revenue exists, and we just need to transport that model on. So, you know, I hope the committee will be extremely supportive of the petition. And again, it does command cross-party support. Thank you, Convener.
Thank Jackie Bailey for her comments. Now, is there any final comments before I move on to submission? Chip Brodie.
Just, if I may, I mean, I've just done a quick calculation in terms of, you know, working out across 32 local authorities. It would be, for 10 days, respite would be about 30,000, which in the scale of things is not huge. Robert and Kyle, do we have, you know, if we had the facility, do you believe there are enough skilled people to handle that kind of situation? I mean, I know we've got skilled care capabilities in Chas just now, but you've just talked about volumes beyond a certain age limit. Do you think we've got the capability or the resource to...
I think so, if they judge it by the care I've had over the years. Rachel House and that, based on that, I would say yes, but it's without experience in other places, it's difficult for me to say what it's like on a wider scale. What do you think, Kevin?
I'm basically the same. Yeah, it's hard to say about all the carers if you're not experiencing all the carers. No, that's hard to describe if you've only got the carers we've had in Chas just now, so we've not had any other experience without Chas. No.
There does seem to be a lot of sort of care providers and things like that, but that doesn't mean that obviously they're all the same standard. I've had lots of agencies over the years and bad experiences as well, so I know personally both sides of it, sort of thing. But
thank you.
I think I'm going to target you the final point before we go to summation.
Really just in the summation, to look at the cross-party working groups that are currently ongoing within the Parliament, and for to ask perhaps their advice on the petition as well.
Thank you for that. So just for Robert and Kyle's benefit, what we're now looking at is what the next step should be for the committee. So we've heard, I think, your excellent evidence, and you've answered the questions well. So we're now looking at the next stage. Clearly, we want to continue your committee, and there's some suggestions. Can I have suggestions from committee members on their next steps?
I mean, I think the recommendations that we write to the Government and the Scottish Partnership for Palliative Care, Health and Social Care Alliance, in thanking Jackie for her views, I think the idea of a debate in the Parliament is not a bad idea.
And just, if you're talking about a plenary session, that's obviously a matter of the conveners group, but by a bit of foresight, I've actually got a bid in for a future session in probably March, April period, without having known which particular title we were looking at. So if committee are agreeable, we actually have a card to play there, which is a bit fortuitous, if committee members are agreeable. John Wilson.
Thank you, Convener. I agree with the right to Scottish Government and the Scottish Partnership for Palliative Care and Health and Social Care Alliance Scotland. But could I suggest we also write to a couple of local authorities just to find out what their role in this provision is? Because clearly some of the funding that comes through It comes from local authorities, and it would be useful to get their views on how this works. And based on Jackie Bailey's comments, could I also suggest we write to NHS Scotland to get an overview from NHS Scotland about what health boards should be doing to make sure this provision is put in place. And it might be that we do get something coming through. And I think Jackie Bailey's right. A lot of the funding that has come in the past for this type of provision has come from charitable funding. But it would also be useful, given the care and attention that's needed for some of the individuals who want respite care away from their parents as well and other family members, that we actually look at the NHS Scotland working in conjunction with local authorities to look at what can be done to set up a provision that would actually give young people, or like to say young people up to the age of 45, but I'm well beyond that. But clearly, if you still see yourself as being young at 45, then good on you.
Angus MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener. I have to say it was an excellent presentation, and you put the points over very well. Given what we've heard this morning from Robert and Kyle, I'm certainly struck by the need to have a debate in the chamber. I'm just curious, there doesn't seem to be much mention of charities that specifically deal with muscular dystrophy, although there is mention of the muscular dystrophy campaign. It might be an idea if we write to them as well to see how they would feel about getting involved in perhaps new facilities in Scotland.
Robert? Sorry. Muscular dystrophy campaign and Action to Share are both aware of this campaign. That I've been in contact with them regularly. They both are keen to work with the government to try and solve this issue. So.
Well, thank you.
Robert, if we could write to them and just get an official response back, that would be good.
Unless there's any other contributions, and what we're suggesting to Robert and Kyle is that we're very enthusiastic about your petition. I think you've identified a huge gap for us to do a lot more work with the Scottish Government on. So we're writing to all the organisations that you heard the various members speak about. I think probably, as far as local government, it's probably worth writing to COSLA as well. But the other thing that we talked about is what's called a plenary. What that means is we will bid for some time in the chamber as a whole. So if we're successful, it will be led by us, and all the other parties will come along, you know, like the health spokespersons will come along and speak. It will be a debate in Parliament, and obviously it would be good if we could get you along and your family and your friends and everyone in the gallery to come as well. So that's what we have to make a bid for that. But as I said, I've got a bid in already for a general time, so hopefully we can convert it to that. So leave us to work out the technicalities, but we're on the case for that. That will probably be around April or May before that comes through. So we'll keep you up to date on that. And could also thank Jackie Bailey for coming along as well, and thank you both for coming along and giving your first bit of evidence to the Parliament. And we hope to see you back soon, particularly when we have the debate in Parliament. And I'll suspend for 1 minute to allow both our witnesses to leave. If we can restart our committee, and we're going back now to the third current petition. is PE 1458 by Peter Chirby on the Register of Interest for members of Scotland's Judiciary. Members have a note by the Clerk, despite a briefing on Section 23(7) of the Scotland Act 1998, because we asked for a particular briefing on that. Members will know that Chip Brodie and I had arranged to meet Lord Gill. That meeting was set up in Parliament. Unfortunately, because of the sad death of Helen Eadie, that was the same day as the funeral. So clearly we felt it was most appropriate to cancel the meeting so that we could attend the funeral. And the meeting has been rescheduled for later in January. With committee's approval, I would suggest we defer discussion of this petition until Chip Brodie and I have met the Lord President.
Can I just ask, sort of big pardon, convener, that
sure.
Given that the New Zealand petition, or not petition, but bill is still being considered, they're not due to report on that until February, but it would be good if we could have an update on anything that's been involved in the proceedings, just to see what direction is going in.
Okay. Agreed. Okay. The fourth current petition is PE 1465 by Tony Ivanov on maintenance of vacant land in private ownership. Members have note by the Clerk, it's paper 7, and submissions. Could invite contributions from members. Angus MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener. I have to say that I am disappointed that the Scottish Government's not willing to take on board the petitioner's argument. While the Town and Country Planning Act of 1997 does allow a planning authority to take action regarding vacant land in private ownership, it's clear that there's little incentive to enforce notices where the chances of recouping any expenditure is low. So it's clear to me that an extension of the provision of Section 179 amenity notices to include prosecution powers would assist in a number of cases. So it's unfortunate, to say the least, that the Scottish Government has no plans to amend Section 179 and backup powers which would allow councils to prosecute or serve fixed penalty notices would certainly have helped resolve the situations which the petitioner has referred to. So I'm disappointed that the Scottish Government haven't taken this on board. However, the councils clearly do have powers at the moment. However, a fixed penalty would have given the councils a wee bit more clout, as it were. Unfortunately, the government's indicated that it's not prepared to amend the law as it stands, so I think we're going to have to look at other means of trying to convince the government to take in fixed penalties for these breaches.
Can I thank Angus MacDonald for his point? Do you have any specific recommendations for the committee in terms of how to deal with the petition?
Well, I'm loath to close it, but I believe we have kind of hit a brick wall. So I think we have to get our thinking caps on, perhaps, and see what else we can do. But I don't think there's much more that this committee can do in this case.
Right.
Unfortunately.
So it looks like you're going to look at other action beyond the terms of the petition. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Do other members have any other view? Are members minded then? And I take Angus MacDonald's point. This was a good petition. It doesn't look like we've much option other than to close the petition under Rule 15.7, in that the Scottish Government maintains that there are already powers in place to address the issues raised in the petition, and the responsibility for when and how these powers are exercised rests with local authorities. Agreeable?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. The fifth current petition is PE 1480 by Amanda Capel on behalf of the Frank Capel Alzheimer's Awareness Campaign, Alzheimer's and Dementia Awareness. Members have a note by the Clerk and the submissions. Just for information, it may well be in the papers, but I took the opportunity of raising an oral PQ to the Minister at question time about the looking at free personal care for under 65-year-olds who had dementia. Perhaps I could circulate that answer to you. I mean, in fairness, the Minister, I thought, was quite supportive about the general problem without obviously making any clear commitment to change the cut-off point of 65 for free personal care. Can I invite submissions and comments from members? Is it worth, I mean, there is some suggestions we write again to Alzheimer's Scotland and write to COSLA about the work of the charging guidance for non-residential social care services. that be agreeable? Thank you. Move to the sixth current petition is PE 1482 by John Wormersley on isolation in single-room hospitals. Members have a note by the clerk and submissions. Again, can invite contributions from members. There's obviously a number of options there, including seeking the views of the Scottish Health Council on the petition. It's obviously got a key role as being really the consumer voice in Scotland on this issue. Would members be agreeable to that? Thank you. Yeah. And the seventh and final current petition is PE 1483 by John MacLeod and bilingual version of the independence referendum question. Members have a note by the clerk and submissions. Clearly, the Referendum Scotland Bill Committee considered this, and no member at stage 3 put down an amendment to seek a bilingual ballot paper. I think the government's view on this is quite clear. It's not wishing to accept the terms of this petition. Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Clearly, in my role as convener of the cross-party group on Gaelic, I did have and do have a great deal of sympathy with this petition, particularly given the guidance in Bord na Gaelic's national plan for Gaelic that the language should be given equal respect, although the guidance does go on to say that that doesn't automatically mean identical treatment for Gaelic and English in all circumstances. It's unfortunate that the campaign for a bilingual ballot paper was not started earlier, which would have given the Electoral Commission time to test it. Although I note in the response that the Electoral Commission are saying it would take about 10 weeks to test it. However, given that stage 3 has been passed in the referendum bill, there's very little scope for that to be done. Had the government advised us of that situation with regard to the 10-week timescale from the Electoral Commission, we might have been able to do a bit more earlier on. It's also noticeable that that no similar request has been made for a bilingual ballot paper for any other election to date. And I think we should also take on board the views of the Electoral Management Board for Scotland, who cite voter confusion. And while Gaelic speakers may find that is a spurious argument for not having a bilingual ballot paper, we only have to look back to 2007 to see for ourselves what damage voter confusion can do to an election. However, in the response from the petitioner, John MacLeod, to the Scottish Government's response, he does make an interesting suggestion in his final paragraph. While he acknowledges that it's possibly too late for the Electoral Commission to do an assessment on a bilingual question for this referendum, he's suggesting that perhaps it might be an idea just to go ahead and do a general assessment now rather than later for future referendums or future elections. So I was wondering if the committee would be minded to write back to the Scottish Government and ask them to consider that suggestion with a view to looking at forward elections in the future. So, would you be suggesting, Mr. MacDonald, then that we close the petition, but at the same time write to Scottish Government saying, could you consider this for example, the general election in 2015 or Scottish Parliament election in 2016? Yes, I'd be content with that. Right. And clearly we would expect a response back. Although we're closing it, we would hope to get a response back from the government. Yeah, I think it's competent to do that. Are members agreeable with Angus MacDonald?
Some of us failed in not raising this in the course of the bill. For the life of me, I don't understand the government's position on this, but on the basis of the proposal that Angus MacDonald has made, I would support that. Are members Angus MacDonald?
Convener, I had clearly considered very closely submitting an amendment at stage 3. However, the advice that I've received from the government led me to believe that there was no purpose in doing it at stage 3, given the timescale.
This is probably not a good career move either, but no. That's another issue. So, if I understand members correctly, then we're agreeing unanimously that we close the petition in terms of the points I made earlier, but that we write to Scottish Government asking if they consider this for 2015 and 16. Agreeable. As agreed at item 1, the committee will now go into private session for the last item of today's agenda. I don't think there's anybody in the gallery, so we'll now formally go into private.
Yes.